Hi, my name is Julia Colvin, and this is my presentation for Quadrivium 2301, Section A. Today I will be presenting on polyrhythmic music, and I'll be exploring the usefulness and limitations of it through the National's fake empire and recent research on the difficulties that come with using polyrhythms. So to begin with, what is polyrhythmic music? The polyrhythm is essentially playing two different rhythms simultaneously. So polyrhythm comes from the Greek root poly, which means many, therefore many rhythms. It is quite distinct from traditional Western music, and polyrhythms take root in African tribal music as well as classical Indian music. So here's an example of polyrhythmic music. So starting at the third measure, so right here, the top line plays 3 equally spaced notes per measure, while at the same time, the bottom line plays the 2 notes per measure. The important thing about this is they do it at the same time. Another way to think about this is 2/8 notes being played in the same space as 3/8 notes. So a helpful thing that the Math to Music textbook gives us to understand polyrhythm is saying hot cup of tea and then tapping at 2 different rhythms. So the step 1 is saying hot cup of tea, and then step 2, with your right hand, you're going to tap on hot, cup, and tea, while on your left hand, you tap on hot and up. So it takes a little bit while to get used to, but you can practice this yourself right now, and you can go hot cup of tea, hot cup of tea, hot cup of tea. And while you're doing this, you are playing 2 different rhythms at the same time. A good example of polyrhythmic music, actually from Western culture, is the song Fake Empire by the band The National. It features a 4/3 polyrhythm throughout the entire piece. So the right hand of the piano is playing and the guitar are playing in 4, and the left hand of the piano, the vocals, and the drums are playing in 3. Here is a little example of the sheet music. So there's a lot going on in this song. I'm going to play a few excerpts of the song just in its example. So this is the first one. You're going to hear the right hand of the piano playing in 4 and the left hand playing in 3. And the vocals are going to sound a little bit odd. It's going to be really hard to tell what's going on musically. But I'll play a little bit of that for you.
Stay out super late tonight, picking apples, making pie. Put a little something in our lemonade and take it with us. We're half away in a fake empire. We're half away in a fake empire.
So, as you can hear, it sounds a little bit odd, especially if you are from Western culture. It's going to sound really odd. But here's another excerpt of the song that I think it's a little bit easier to decipher what's happening.
Turn the light out, say goodnight. No thinking for a little while. Last night, try to figure out everything at once. It's hard to keep track of you, falling through the sky. We're half away in a fake empire. We're half away in a fake empire.
So, in this second excerpt, it's much clearer to hear the difference between the 2 rhythms because more instruments are being added. So, as I said previously on the last slide, the vocals are playing in 3, while the right hand of the piano is playing in 4. But in this part, the vocals match both the downbeats and the drums. So the right hand of the piano, again, is playing in 4, while the left hand of the piano is playing in 3, and the vocals and the drums are also playing in 3. So it's just much clearer to hear what's going on. However, there are some limitations to polyrhythms. In the journal article Polyrhythm Perception and Production, a Scoping Review, the authors have done a lot of research on the former literature regarding polyrhythms and the uses of it. They have lots of different things I talk about, but one of their main complaints is that there's a lot of inconsistency regarding the terminology in the literature, and they point out as one of the limitations of polyrhythms the preconceived notions about ratios. So one way they kind of demonstrate this is in this chart called the Fari tree. So to demonstrate easier versus more complex ratios of the polyrhythms, they use this. So I'll show you on the next slide in more detail. So the tree shows at the top simpler ratios, so right up here. But the further down you go, the more complex the ratios are. And it's generally believed that the simpler the ratio, the easier it is to play and it's easier perceived. So more recent studies show that 2 to 5 is perceived audibly as more complex than the 3 to 4 ratio, yet if you look at this chart, they're on the same level. So if you look at F4, they're both on the same level. Now, the article does point out, just kind of as a side note, that just because things are on the same level doesn't mean they're the exact same level of complexity. It's just more around the same level. So it doesn't mean 2 to 5 is just as difficult to play as 3 to 5. They're just around the same. Audibly, especially to Western culture, 2 to 5 seems more complex than 3 to 4 because we're not used to uneven measures. So the way I kind of understood this and was trying to demonstrate it best to you is on a mathematical level, 2 to 5 is the equivalent of 0.4, and 2 to 5 is an uneven ratio. It is not something we commonly use in our day-to-day life. In Western culture, was 3 to 4 being the equivalent of 0.75 and being an even ratio is something we use commonly. In music, we use it. Like 4 to 4 is common time. We use quarters, which are 1/4, or there's 25% to 75%. Like we use that very commonly in our day-to-day lives. So mathematically, to Western culture and people who listen to Western music, 3 to 4 is just much easier to work with because it's something we experience in our day-to-day lives. So, in conclusion, the mathematical explanation of ratios is limited. Real-world polyphonic music that features polyrhythms usually consists of more complex rhythmic structures, and therefore should not be limited to ratio alone, if you look at that little paragraph right there. Another helpful paragraph I read, in general, the sum ratio provides a good indication of complexity, but as discussed, has its limitations. So just to kind of sum everything up real quickly, polyrhythm is playing multiple rhythms at once, and the National's Fake Empire provides a great example of this. The journal article highlights limitations and problems with relying solely on the mathematical ratios. So in this case, the mathematical ratios are not 100% reliable in displaying the complexity of polyrhythm. As we saw on the Fari tree, 2 to 5 is the same level as 3 to 4. Additionally, the complexities are also somewhat relative. So if you're from Western culture, certain ratios are going to sound way more complex to you because they're uneven when you're used to even ratios and even numbers more. But if you're from Eastern culture or listen to Eastern music, it might be a little bit different. So thank you so much for your time and your attention. Here is my bibliography with all of the sources I used for this project. Thank you so much.